Alright, YouTube, spurred on by certain posts on 4chan and elsewhere regarding the stampede at Hajj that happened, I believe, 2 days ago now, or maybe it was yesterday, I can't remember, in Saudi Arabia at Mecca. The crane, of course, smashing into Mecca on 9/11, no less. Now, the mosque fire in London, the largest mosque in all of Western Europe, has been severely damaged, the Morgan Mosque in southern London. A lot of people, those who are more astute, have realized that a lot of these relatively large disasters involving these Islamic holy sites sort of post date this period of ISIS beginning to attack some of these pagan relics in the Middle East. I spoke before about the general concept of pagan, spiritual, thought form, whatever you want to term it, energy in pagan ruins, how when you disturb this, bad things tend to happen, even if you consider it just sort of within the realm of theoretical physics in a thought form. You don't have to believe in literal demons or deities as they might be termed. However, I need to go deeper into it to try to explain to the people who are making such posts. They need to understand why this works, why this happens, as opposed to simply acknowledging the fact that it does. Because clearly, collective consciousness affects the reality around us, maybe not generally in a tangible way, but thoughts interact with one another. The human mind creates thoughts. Speech or imagery or something goes out from the human mind, it affects the thoughts and consciousness of others. It's almost a form of telepathy. It has an effect upon the way people act, it has an effect upon what happens in the world. The chaos theory alone would belie the fact that this is actually happening. And you know, some of the experiments at CERN are really coming to the same conclusions. Some of the experiments they're doing now with particles, really, they're beginning to understand that things are interconnected more than we thought before, and that things aren't entirely discrete, I suppose. Just had some sort of experiment where they had a couple people essentially conducting telepathy when hooked up to computers at great distance. So it is possible. We're now seeing that that's the case. This goes into two different traditions. One is Abrahamic, which would be more widely accepted, I guess, as an explanation by Christians and Islamists, and Jews as well. The other is pagan. The Abrahamic tradition goes back to the Solomonic cycle. If you read any of the works within this core of literature, the Ars Notoria, similar works, there are allusions to it as well in medieval and Renaissance writings. Some antiquated writings as well had basically the same concept. You will find many stories about King Solomon or people given charge by King Solomon or people following the footsteps of King Solomon or having something to do with the Solomonic magical tradition itself, binding various what they would call demons, what the pagan people would call their deities, or some sort of spiritual force that they worship or they acknowledge exists. Binding these forces, oddly enough, often in construction material. If you read the story regarding the building of the Temple of Jerusalem, what does Solomon do to build the temple? It's not built by human labor largely, it's built by demons. Demons that he called forth. There was a specific demon that was sort of tormenting people in the countryside, including one of Solomon's workers, one of his slaves, and taking his wages and doing, making him sick and so forth. Solomon, thus, gets contacted by the archangel Uriel and receives a sort of magical ring imbued with certain powers that allows him to control demons. Using these demons, which he then binds up, he is able to, at the same time, clear his region that he controls of these demonic presences, binding them with his power, and forces them to, in a rather paranormal way, work to build the temple, spinning the hemp, carving the rocks, setting the tiles, crafting the wood, and so forth. And one particularly bad demon came from Arabia, wasn't even from Israel. The Arabians, after he began constructing the temple, learned of his wisdom in dealing with demonology, and they asked him to help them because there was a demon causing sandstorms in their kingdom down in what's now Saudi Arabia. So he sent one of his men out there with the ring. The man managed to bind the demon and bring it back in a wineskin, and the cornerstone of the Temple of Jerusalem, supposedly, was sort of levitated into place by this animated walking wineskin in which the demon was shut up by the power of this ring, and remains there to this day, according to this tradition, by the way. Many times what you have, these pagan ruins supposedly are built with the help of these various entities, whether they're operating under their own will or asked or commanded to do so by someone friendly to them or able to control them, or whether they are forcibly compelled against their will to do so. It makes really no difference. So in the Solomonic tradition, the reason why you would leave these ruins alone is you wouldn't want to free these demonic or divine entities from their containment there. They're bound to them in some way, in a spiritual manner. And this is common across many Renaissance writings. Anything within the Solomonic cycle is fixating on the same basic central storyline. In the pagan tradition, these beings would be considered deities rather than demons. If you look at the Ars Goetia, you find Ammon there. Egyptian deity represented as a demon that was sealed up by Solomon in an urn, using again the same basic concept of the power of this magical ring that he had from the archangel Uriel. And in this case, in the pagan case, these deities are sort of asleep. These ruins are either hidden or sort of dormant and unused for a great length of time, and the deity or the spiritual force is still there in an ambient sort of way, undisturbed, and you're not supposed to disturb these tombs. It's like disturbing the tombs of the dead. The Christians often believe that you should leave the graves of humans. They're not even deities or demons or anything like that, just human graves. You're supposed to not do anything to them. You're not supposed to desecrate them. You're supposed to leave them where they're buried. You don't walk all over the tombstones. You don't walk over the grave itself. You don't try to dig people out. You don't do terrible things to bodies. You leave them alone because you're afraid of being somehow cursed by the power that's contained therein. You don't want a ghost coming after you or something. But the same people that believe this suspend their belief when it comes to something like pagan ruins, as though there was no spiritual force there, even though in some cases you've got thousands of years of history of these spots being used for all sorts of occult rituals. And these same people would say, well, if a Ouija board's used in the occult, yeah, we'll believe that that's possessed by Satan. But a pagan ruin where actual occultism went on for 5,000 years nonstop, oh, there's no power there. These people fail to make sense when they make these contradicting claims. If they believe in one, they ought to believe in the other, and they ought to leave these pagan relics alone. You can look back at history and look at what happens to some of these nations when they start picking away at the pagan ruins. What happens to Rome fairly shortly after they pillage the oracle at Delphi and begin suppressing some of these folkish cults on the outskirts of the empire? Oh, Rome falls. Oh, well, imagine that. Why did this take place? I can't imagine why. The USSR collapses. What did they started to do? What did the USSR do not long before that? They had been suppressing primarily people who were already Christian. They were, Orthodox Christians or secular in the Ukraine, in Belarus, in the Baltic states or something. As soon as they start reaching their sort of railroad and factory tentacles out across Siberia to begin settling that land too, and they start disturbing some of these locations out in the middle of nowhere where there are megalithic remains, let's face it, whether they want to recognize it or not. Oh, the USSR falls. What preceded the U.S. Civil War when the United States was ripped in half and very almost, fought itself for years and almost collapsed as well? Oh, that's right. Started building all of these little streets and so forth across the Midwest, actually pillaging the whatever civilization built the burial mounds there. They started quarrying them for easy rocks. Easy soil, and they would go right through them if they had a chance, or right over them. They weren't going around these mounds. They were quarrying them out for cheap labor material. So you have examples where this has happened, and it's happening right now in the Middle East. ISIS and some of these other groups are going after these pagan ruins. Shortly after Palmyra, all of these disasters happen. ISIS gets infected with leishmaniasis. Look at what happened when certain East African Islamists started raiding the tombs in Mali. These tombs have been there for centuries in many cases, dating back to pre-Islamic times. They're pagan ruins, important archaeological sites. What happens shortly thereafter, not far from where they're fucking with these ruins? Ebola breaks out. Everyone in the whole area is absolutely fucking terrified. It does happen. You can ascribe it to a collective thought form affecting reality and sort of believe in the sort of secular view of it. Or you can claim it has to do with demons, or you can claim it has to do with some pagan deity, if indeed you believe in such things. It doesn't really matter. Observation, you can observe reality. You can observe what happens when you do certain things. It's cause and effect. Well, if this happens, how often does it have to happen reliably for people to take note and think that something's going wrong? Another thing you could posit as an explanation is that the only time that a culture would have so little regard for the past, for history, and for academia that it begins destroying pagan ruins for no reason other than its own edification would be when that culture is already highly unstable and prone to collapse anyway. That should please the completely secular. That's a fine explanation if you want to use that. I would say it has something more to do with spiritual things. It's my opinion. You can believe what you want, but you can observe that this is the case. Culture is completely overthrown. People have no regard for history, no regard for sacred spaces. They become insular. They become fanatic about a specific faith to the exclusion of others, and they begin destroying these relics. This shows the strain on the culture as well. So you have two basic traditions. You have the Solomonic cycle. Anyone that believes in Christianity, Judaism, or Islam should take note, because they all believe in exactly the same principles behind these works, dating back to almost antiquity, dating back to the times when Rome still existed, actually as a culture, as an empire, that is. And the other being the pagan, which would affect everyone else. Everyone should believe that these sites should be left alone. Even the Taliban, look at what happens when they blew up all those Buddha statues. Maybe they were avenged by some really angry bodhisattva. I'm not sure if the bodhisattva is supposed to be able to do anything malevolent, but something happened to him, because the Taliban now is basically, almost non-existent. Basically, they have to operate wherever ISIS tells them to operate, because they don't have enough power on their own. So people should take note of that, because it appears in a great deal of literature from this ancient period, from the medieval and Renaissance period, even up into the fairly modern period. A lot of the occultism today, it's just based on the Solomonic cycle writings. It's exactly the same, uses the same exact principles. Crowley's work, largely based off the same stuff and some Hermetic conclusions. The Hermetic stuff contains basically similar illusions in some cases. You have to study this writing. I study it as I'm editing these works for release, these very old works. I'm also studying them in as much depth as I can, so I've been reading quite a bit of occult literature lately. But people, yes, should definitely leave those pagan ruins alone. It is a very bad idea to tamper with them. That's about all. Peace out.